Howdy, how's it going? Welcome back, or howdy if you're new. This is the all-new ROG Ally X, and it is not just the OG ROG Ally going through a gothic phase. Virtually everything on this has been tweaked or changed or improved upon besides the screen and the APU. It still uses the awesome Z1 Extreme APU and the 120Hz 1080p display that has FreeSync Premium. Both of those are the exact same, but that's where the similarities end. And I'm going to tell you about everything through this whole video and give you a better idea if you should keep your ROG Ally or if you should go ahead and buy the Ally X. And if you have neither one, this will give you a much better idea of which one is going to fit you and your lifestyle. The Ally X, of course, comes in at a much higher price point, about $799 at the time of filming this, but I think it's worth it. I definitely think it's worth it. Quick thank you to ASUS for sending this over for a review, but it will not impact my review because I still did buy one for myself to keep, and I absolutely love this unit. And I also love my OG Ally, and if you haven't seen my videos on this, go check them out. If you're wondering why they didn't change the APU, at the time of making this, there really was no other APU choice. There's no Z2 Extreme, no Z3, no, that's it. We got the Z1 Extreme, that's pretty much the best of the best as far as APUs currently. And in terms of the screen, well, screen's awesome. It's super bright, 500 nits of brightness. It does really well in low light areas. Of course, it's not an OLED, but I think it looks quite nice. And I don't have any problems with the screen itself at all. The biggest improvement that most of you guys already know about is the battery. Now they have upgraded this thing to a massive 80 watt-hour battery, and all of the other things combined upgrade wise, it only added 11% of the weight.
Whoa, no way!
If you have an Ally, you can do a battery mod. You can put one of these laptop batteries in here, but it adds a substantial amount of girth and weight. There's several other mods as well, but also adds girth and weight. We are trying to see if we can take the battery out of here and put it in the Ally. I haven't really seen many people talk about it or have much headway with it, but in my last video I did explore that option. I'm going to keep working on that. The other major quality of life improvement is the RAM. I have been begging and begging and begging for all of these handheld companies that are using shared RAM to stop giving us 16 gigs of RAM. It is a slap in the face and it is an insult because it does not cost that much more money to go with 24 or 32. The Ally X comes with 24 gigs of 7500 mega transfers per second RAM, and then you've got 16 gigs, 6400 mega transfers on the Ally OG. So that's a big speed boost plus your RAM itself, the overall RAM capacity. And that makes it where default, this goes to 8 gigs for VRAM, and then you've got 16 for RAM. And then default, this goes to 4 gigs for VRAM, and then you've got the rest for Windows and all your other services. And I have had many instances where the OG Ally runs out of RAM or VRAM, and you start hitting into the basically cache or the page file, and your 1% lows significantly struggle on certain games. And then some games like Forza will give you a warning saying, hey, you're out of VRAM, hey, you're out of RAM, depending on what graphical settings you're using. And I do not have that issue at all. Very happy to report that every single game I tested, I saw some improvements on, and it was just nice being able to dial up those graphical settings and just enjoy it and not have to worry. Now, the next thing about worrying, I no longer have battery life anxiety. I went from about 45 to 50 minutes on most AAA games to over 2 hours, and that was pretty shocking to me because I knew it was double the capacity, but I didn't actually know the efficiency of the battery, the efficiency of the power profiles, and a lot of the other improvements and tweaks they've made within software. But all that translates to more than double your battery life in most instances. One of the other improvements that they've made is they increased the heat pipe size, and they also changed the fan blade design from a 44 fan blade design to a 77 fan blade design. And more fan blades means more better, obviously. All jokes aside, you guys know I am the cooling mod guru here, and the wise words of Steve from Gamers Nexus.
It's kind of interesting. YouTube creator CPVC Tech has been experimenting with adding more cooling and storage to the Ally across several videos, and in a recent video showed off an RGB 92mm fan mod with internal power and control. The modder also added a custom white acrylic ROG logo fan grill for style, out ROG and even ROG. CPVC Tech goes over the wiring and shows other mods, like an EK-M.2 heatsink on an aftermarket 2280 size SSD.
So with the backplate on the ROG Ally X, they opened up the intake vents a lot. They opened up the exhaust vents a lot, and they added another exhaust vent here, and that actually takes air and pushes it underneath the screen, and it keeps the screen even a little bit cooler as well. So I was pretty shocked at that. This is what the Ally should have been from day one, but when you don't have a ton of modders out there kind of telling the manufacturers what to put in, well, you get what you get. So now that we have this big handheld modding community that we've built here, I think that's really pushing some of these manufacturers to take notes and to implement some of these things into their next designs and their next handhelds, because you'll see in the future why that's important. So we went from a 2230 drive to a 2280, and I have never been a fan of the 2230s. They're more expensive, they run hotter, and you're limited in size to 2 terabytes. So as you know, if you haven't seen already, I upgraded this to the 990 Pro. It's a 4 terabyte model. It does run really spicy, so I don't recommend running this without a heatsink, although you can if you like to just let your drive cook itself and thermally throttle. Go right ahead, but the manufacturers do not suggest doing that. If you don't believe me, watch the video where I actually spoke to the manufacturers. So from the factory, you get a 1 terabyte 2280, and this is a single chiplet design for the memory, and then you've got a controller right there. So there's not a lot that's going to get hot on here, not like a 990 Pro. So from the factory, you don't need per se a heatsink on this, but if you want to improve the thermals, you actually totally can put a heatsink on this. And the battery cable, by the way, it does not get in the way or impact it, so you can put a thick and tall heatsink on here. Easily a 5mm tall heatsink will fit perfectly fine on any drive you put in there, and if you buy one that is pre-heat synced, every one of those virtually should fit without any problems. Now moving back to the outside of the device, let's talk about one of the things that people have talked about, and it is the introduction of a Thunderbolt port. This Thunderbolt port will give you up to 50 gigabytes per second transfer speed, and the trade-off is they did get rid of the XG Mobile port. Now let's be real, 1% of you guys have the XG Mobile, but if you do, here's my best advice. It's unofficial, off the record. Sell your XG Mobile on eBay, buy yourself a Thunderbolt GPU, and call it a day. One of the things they also changed was the ABXY buttons. There was nothing wrong with these, but I modded them anyways. I put in some 3D printed ones to give it a little bit better feel as far as texture goes and color. I like it. Now, these are way better than the factory ones. They're raised and they are more pronounced, and you can feel them a lot better. They also upgraded the D-pad. This actually was only a 4-way D-pad, so if you're playing fighting games, having that extra direction is really going to help you out a lot. They also improved the joystick significantly. One of the other things that I modded was I changed the springs to a tighter spring rate, and that really changed the way it feels in a lot of games where you need the most precise movements. It's very, very close. These might even be slightly tighter than what mine were right here. But as far as factory to factory, much bigger improvement. If you want to upgrade these sticks, you eventually should be able to find some drop-in Hall effect joystick replacements, which will be nice, and they will be pretty easy to do, but when they arrive, I will show you how to do those. Now moving up to the top as well, the power button has changed a little bit. This is your fingerprint sensor and your power button. I like the one on the original Ally a little bit better. Changed the memory card location, so instead of it being near the power adapter, you've got it over here, so the memory card and the controller should run a lot cooler as well. And these triggers and the bumpers have even been tweaked a lot. They do feel a little tighter, but it's hard to tell. But what I can tell is how much wider this is and how it's got a curve to it. I love the way that feels. I cannot tell you how much I love it. It is absolutely awesome. The bumpers are more clicky. They have a more positive click to them. And that's pretty much where the changes on the outside are going to end. Other than we also have some upgraded speakers as well, and they are a little louder and they have a little bit more depth and bass to them as well. When it comes to software and improvements, they made some pretty big changes with Armoury Crate. We actually have one app to rule them all. So no more My ASUS and Armoury Crate. This virtually should get every update through here, but you still need to be checking Windows Update and checking out the advanced menus and stuff as well for certain updates just get pushed through Windows Update as well. So that's why it's important not to disable Windows updates. Believe it or not, there's a lot of driver updates and things that pop through. If you want a deeper video on some of the nuances and updates to Armoury Crate, I'll leave a link below for a much better video that can go in depth and fully explain this software, because I am not a software person. I just set it and forget it, and the only thing I actually use is this menu right here, this pop-out menu that lets you change the refresh rate, your LED brightness, and you can customize these icons. That's all I use as far as Armoury Crate, unless I'm going in to do updates. Now, of course, you can still go in here and recalibrate your joysticks, recalibrate your triggers. You can go in here and change the TDP in manual. You can change the fan curves. Moving this around is very, very tricky. I'm sure we'll get an update to that, but you kind of have to play with it. I do recommend using a mouse when you're changing this stuff around. It's not very easy to scroll this wheel down. So there's that. You can go in here and change some of your GPU settings, your eco settings that'll help save you some battery life. You can look at system stats. There's quite a bit in here that will be very useful for you. You can go into keyboard shortcuts. You can program little shortcuts to these buttons back here, which also have been moved in a totally different location, which I really, really like, because the original ones were horrible. I hated the back buttons so much that I got some flat buttons from Handheld DIY to go on my Handheld DIY backplate, and I no longer have false button presses because they're just chilling. I have not had any accidental button presses with these. In fact, it is so good in the placement, I don't even touch them with my fingers at all. It just, I can easily move it there and click it, but it's not in the way like it was before. So I really like what they did to that. Now, when it comes to benchmarks, which I'm sure you guys are here for, I'm going to give you a breakdown between both of these allies on just a few scenarios, and I'm going to give you some synthetic test and some gaming test. That way you can kind of get a good idea of what the performance difference is between the two. And this should translate to most games, but some games there might not be a big difference. Some games there might be a big difference, but you're generally going to see about maybe a 10 to 15% difference in performance. We did find an outlier, Tony Hawk Pro Skater, which I'll show you the video at the end of the difference between those, and that was the biggest difference I found. But when it came to Forza and Modern Warfare, they were pretty similar, but there was about that 10 to 15% boost. And we are going to use the exact same settings, which I'll put up here above. I also use the same settings in the AMD GPU software, and I also use the same settings in the game, which I'll put up here as well for each game before we start. So the first game right here that we have is going to be Modern Warfare 3. And I'll put up the settings right here on the screen so you can copy them down if you want to run some good optimized settings. Now, comparing the 25 to the 30 watt on the ROG Ally X, there's a little bit of difference here, not too much, but you will notice that the temperatures on the Ally X drop about 6 degrees Celsius when you drop from that 30 to the 25, and that is plugged in on the 30 and unplugged on the 25. But the reason you're seeing lower temperatures on the Ally OG is simply because we are running a Handheld DIY backplate, and there is some other cooling mods in there as well. So comparing the FPS between them, there's about a 10% difference at best. But what does seem to be happening is the in-game FPS that I'm getting, it's about 120 FPS in-game, and that's pretty much across all the Modern Warfare 3 maps, anything from Shipment to Rust, you name it. We have Forza Horizon 5, and I'll put up the settings here. And looking at the FPS here, they're nearly identical. There is not that much difference between the two, except on the 1% lows, the minimums, those seem to be a little bit better for sure. And if you're looking at the average FPS on the 25 watt, that's where you see the biggest difference at, actually. So The power profile in the 25 watt seems to be the sweet spot for the Ally. If you're going to 30 watt, it's literally just putting more heat into the device, and it's not actually giving you as much of a performance boost. So the next test is Cinebench R23, and this is a CPU workload, and it's going to take full advantage of this faster RAM that we have on the Ally X. You can see at 25 watts, we have a 1,000-point increase, but when you go down to multi-core on the 30 watt mode, they're pretty similar. There's not that much of a difference between the two. Moving into our final test, before we get into a little bit of gameplay footage, we have 3D Mark Time Spy. And I noticed something really interesting about this test. Very odd behavior, but I ran it multiple times over and over and over again, and I still got the same results. So anyways, on both of them, you will see that there's a big disparity on the CPU score. If you're looking at the CPU score on the ROG Ally X, it's 6,709 on 25 watt versus 7,612 on 25 watt on the ROG Ally. That's nearly 1,000 points difference. It's about 900 points to be exact. And then up at the 30 watt mode, we're getting about 300 points difference. It's not as big of a disparity, but when it comes to the 25 watt mode, for some reason, the ROG Ally was outperforming it just on the CPU load. But if you look at everything else, the Ally X stomps it. Overall score and GPU score completely stomps it. That was a weird anomaly for me, but I'm sure one of you guys in the comments could easily explain it away. Now keep in mind, this is a modded ROG Ally. This is the handheld DIY backplate, so I'm giving this every advantage possible to shine in the best light it can. There is even a metal little backplate inside of here, the big thermal pad, that is cooling it by transferring the heat from the back of the heat pipe to the back of this backplate. So it is taking in some of that cool air through these vents back here and cooling it off. So it does work, as you can see. Stock, these temps would have been about the same easily, if not more. That backplate does lower temps about up to 10 degrees sometimes. The biggest difference of them all was Tony Hawk Pro Skater. I'm noticing that we're getting about 20 FPS more on average, and the only cost that I'm noticing is about 3 to 4 watts more. But keep in mind, this battery is twice the battery, and it will last twice as long. So I don't have any problems with using maybe 3 to 4 watts more power to net me 20 FPS more. So this power profile on 25 watts is so seriously optimized. In certain games and scenarios, you might notice something like this. Now, the one thing I also notice is that the GPU clock speed is higher, but the CPU clock speed is lower. So it's really balancing this out a lot better than I expected. So you might want to try all your games and see which one that you can take advantage of the most. This one was pretty cool to see. Well, you made it to the end of the video and you're still undecided, so let me help you out. If you have an ROG Ally OG and you're happy with it, keep it. This thing is a beast. There's all kinds of upgrades you could do to it. You can upgrade the cooling, you can upgrade the NVMe, you can do a lot with it. It's still actually a great device, and I really enjoy it. The only caveat is the battery life, and the battery life kind of stinks, as you know. If you're shopping for a new handheld and you haven't bought one yet, or you're in the market for an upgrade, the Ally X definitely is the answer. This thing has the best battery life out of any handheld I've played. It's the absolute most comfortable handheld I've ever used, and it's the most upgrade friendly that I've ever seen and ever had the experience of working on. I still have my 1X player video coming. I need to polish it out a little bit more, but that thing, if you wanted to upgrade the NVMe drive and that, good luck. That thing was pretty tough, and I'll explain why later. But as far as upgradability, ease of use, future-proofing, this thing is pretty dang solid. I hate to use that word future-proofing, but this thing is as close as you can get. I love this thing. I really can't wait to see what mods I can do to it later down the road, what all comes out for it. But this thing is a monster, and at $7.99, it kind of makes sense because of the freaking upgrades they threw in this thing. They threw the kitchen sink in it, I'm telling you. It's worth it. It gets my CPPC Tech stamp of approval. Man, I'm tired. I couldn't even get that one out. It gets my CPPC Tech stamp of approval. This thing is a beast. I hope you guys enjoy it. If you are picking it up, if you have any questions about it, or there's anything you want me to try out, hey, drop it below. I love those comments. Well, look, guys, I hope all of y'all enjoyed this video. And until the next one, I hope you have a good afternoon, good evening, or good night.